And, I like to joke that in a lot of Christian circles, marriage is this consecration between a man and a woman and God, which technically is a threesome. So unless,
right.
Okay. 1, 2, ready, go.
Welcome to the Called to Be Bad podcast. My name is Mariah Martin, and I feel called to be bad. It turns out I'm not the only one. Join us as we dig into all things bad, scandalous, deviant, the stuff that makes good church folks squirm in the sanctuary. Why? Well, because sometimes the scandalous is spiritual, deviant is divine, and bad is beautiful. Say yes to the call, and let's see what holy trouble we get into today. Hello, Ogun.
Hi.
Welcome to Call to Be Bad.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yes. So this is Ogun Holder, and he's going to introduce himself today.
Yes, pronouns he, him. I am an ordained minister in the tradition of unity, which is not Unitarian, kind of Unitarian adjacent, but it is what we call New Thought Christianity. I like to say about unity, it's Christians who want to be Buddhist, but they're not ready to give up God yet. So that tells you everything about what you need to know. I'm the co-founder of an online platform called Project Sanctus. I'm not serving in a church right now. I describe Project Sanctus as a safe, brave online space for us to discover and be our holiest selves. And in so doing, we create a world of love, justice, and liberation for all. Our work centers around anti-racism, but we kind of take up the niche that serves spiritual communities and spiritual seekers and religious folk who seem to think because they love God that they can possibly be racist in any way, shape, or form. So that's a lot of fun. So that's what I do primarily. I'm a spiritual coach, a grief counselor. I've done a lot of training in the Enneagram. Love me the Enneagram.
What are you in the Enneagram? Can I ask?
Textbook 9. 9 with
Textbook
an 8 wing.
9.
Oh, yes.
9 with an 8 wing. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. How about you?
I'm a 4.
Yes. I was going to guess that, but
Were you really already?
Yes, I was. Yes, I was. From what I've heard and seen of you and the energy you exude, I was going with 4.
Yeah. I'm married to a 9, so I have a lot of 1s in my life that I kind of wonder sometimes. I think I have some 1 issues, but I've joked before on this podcast that people need to know the Enneagram before they watch this podcast because we talk about it a lot. So
there you go.
Sorry for non-Enneagrammers out there.
That's hilarious. And I also have my own podcast, 2 of them, with Project Sanctus. We do a podcast called With Love and Justice for All, which is also actually the name of the column that I write. And we discuss things around embodied anti-racism and dismantling white supremacy. But I also do a podcast called Pub Theology. It's kind of an interfaith podcast. Me and 2 other ministers from other denominations. We drink beer and talk about stuff.
Nice.
So yeah, you can look those up. I think that's me in a nutshell.
Excellent. Well, very excited to have you on, and it's interesting because of all of there was 7 different things that we could have had you on for in your bio, and yet we have you on to talk about non-monogamy. So that's super exciting. But before we dive into all of that, I'm curious what you are drinking today.
Coconut water. I am originally from Barbados, and so you might hear a little bit of the lilt in the accent. It comes and goes. But coconut water is, I've realized for some people, a real love-hate relationship with coconut water. But
okay.
I love it. I grew up on it, and it is nature's perfect drink. It's filled with just natural nutrients and antioxidants and all that good stuff. So I guzzle this stuff. It is super expensive when you got to buy it in carton at the store, but it's a great post-workout drink as well. Okay. So right before I came here, I was on the spin bike for a little bit and decided, let me get me some coconut water.
Nice.
So that's what I got.
Well, I have my usual coffee. I try to have my mugs match whatever we're talking about today.
Okay.
So it's a little cheesy, but I have a mug that says some bunny loves you.
Some bunny loves you.
Bunny. And it has two bunnies on it. But because we're talking about non-monogamy / polyamory, I took a little dry erase marker and crossed off the Y, and I wrote, some bunnies love you.
Yes. There
Which
you go.
is kind of true in my life because I have 3 bunnies and I hope that they love me, but they probably more just like tolerate my love for them. So,
love shows up in many ways.
Mm-hmm. Hello, beloved baddies. A quick break to tell you that this episode is sponsored by the Center for Art, Humor, and Soul, a nonprofit that supports and amplifies the voices of edgewalkers through art that catalyzes change, laughter that brings us together, and soul awakening to the creative spark within us. The support from the Center for Art, Humor, and Soul has meant the world to this podcast. So I highly encourage you to check out their website, arthumorandsoul.com, to see their other featured artists and projects. If you want to support the podcast, you can check out our Patreon or get in touch. Now I'll let you get back to this episode of Called to be Bad. So how do you define monogamy, non-monogamy, and how do those terms fit within polyamory?
So kind of working backwards a little bit, polyamory is a subset of non-monogamy. So I'll start there.
Okay.
To go back to the definitions, you can define monogamy, or I define monogamy, many people do, as being in a sexual or romantic relationship with only one partner at a time. Whereas non-monogamy, and I always want to add the prefix ethical non-monogamy or consensual non-monogamy, is where people are engaged in emotional or sexual relationships with multiple partners with the full knowledge and consent of everyone involved. And that's the important part. Okay. And so non-monogamy can outpicture in a variety of ways. Polyamory is one of them. And that's where each person in the relationship has multiple partners that everyone's aware about. Sometimes you may have a main anchor partner, or this is my main partner, and I get to date other people. My partner gets to date other people. Sometimes the agreement is that we all know who we're dating, and they call that like kitchen table polyamory, or sometimes they date separately. Some people have open relationships, which is a little different. Open relationships can look many ways, and for some people, it's it may your other partners. It may be romantic, it may be sexual, it may just be dating, and it may be only one person in the relationship has these other partners. I want to say extra other partners. Maybe one person doesn't. There's swinging, which is involving both partners mostly engage in sexual relationships with other partners or other couples. There's different ways that ethical non-monogamy outpictures. Polyamory is only one of them. Me personally, which is why I think I'm on here also, is that I practice what we call solo polyamory, which means I do not have a primary partner. Or as I like to consider it, I am my primary partner. And I do have other both sexual and romantic relationships with other partners. And yes, they're all aware that I have relationships with them as well. So I think that sort of kind of sums it up. One thing to note is that if you're listening, you're thinking this is like, it's not the norm. And I hate to use the word norm and normal. Know that many people, probably more than you think, are engaging in non-monogamy. So, for example, a recent study said that like 4 to 5% of American adults are practicing some form of ethical non-monogamy as we speak. And when you think about that, that's millions of people, right? In fact, 43% in 2020, 43% of millennials said that this was their preferred relationship style. So it's not so far-fetched. And many people will probably not self-report because there's still a lot of stigma around it as well. Even if it is consensual, still a lot of stigma. So, and I always encourage, again, the ethical or the consensual part before it. Some other forms of non-monogamy that we don't talk a lot about are polygamy and polyandry. So polygamy is when a man has multiple wives, more than one wife. Polyandry is when the wife has more than one husband. So they're all married, which is not legal here in the U.S. However, there are many cultures around the world that, unfortunately, mostly it's polygamy. So there's a whole like patriarchal bent to that. But there are actually a couple cultures around the world that practice polyandry as well, where the wife is allowed to have multiple husbands. So, and that's existed for, I don't know, as long as humans has been around, pretty much.
Right. I mean, and if you think about a lot of the relationships in the Bible, they would be considered non-monogamous to extent. Maybe not the ethical or consensual non-monogamous, but like concubines, multiple wives. You know, if you think about like biblical marriage, which I'm kind of saying tongue in cheek here because
it was not.
It's not. Biblical marriage is certainly not one man, one woman for life. Biblical marriage looks like a variety of things. So speaking of, because I use the term polyamory probably more than non-monogamy, or I've just heard that term used more. And when I think of polyamory, I've heard it used described almost as if it were an orientation. It's as like the capacity to love multiple people. Would you say that is an accurate way of thinking of polyamory?
I would say more to describe that for non-monogamy, right? Because again, polyamory is only one way non-monogamy outpictures itself. But also, I mean, when you say the ability to love multiple people, are you specifically referring to sexually and romantically? Because those are important qualifiers, because we all have the capacity to love multiple people. We all do.
Well, that's kind of what I was a little bit getting at, is I think that we do kind of all have the capacity to love multiple people in many different ways.
Yes.
But because we have been taught there is one script for how to do life and how to do marriage and how to do relationships and even how to do friendship, we have a hard time expanding our imagination for what love is and what relationships and life can look like.
Yes. So yes, I believe we all have the capacity to do that. We may individually realize we don't want to do that because it can be complicated, it can be complex, but it can also be amazingly rewarding and life fulfilling as well. So yes, you're right. There is a script that says a very conventional Western thinking, capitalist related, even white supremacy related script that says the right way you do marriage or long-term relationship or life partnership, it's just one man, one woman, or if we're a little more evolved, just, doesn't matter the orientation or the genders, but two people. Yeah. Right. And no, we have the capacity for a lot more than that. In fact, historically, we were not originally monogamous. Monogamy is more of the conscious choice than non-monogamy. And historically, you can see, if you do some deep dive research, you can see how monogamy evolved over the millennia. No one's quite sure when it started and for what reason. There's a lot of theories out there. Some anthropologists think it's because of prevention of diseases, some associated with actually the Romans who wanted to stop their soldiers from wandering off and finding multiple partners. So so in order to be in the army, monogamy was enforced. Some realized that it seemed to coincide with the rise of agrarian culture when we became focused on growing crops, and folks were like, I need some people to work the farm, so let me just get with one partner and pop out some babies, and it became a family business.
Right.
And it evolved in that way. But one of the interesting pieces about that is as it evolved, monogamy grew and became the standard. There was, as I mentioned earlier, great stigma attached to those who chose not to practice that. It was seen as, ironically, anti-Christian, even though, to your point earlier, so many instances in the Bible where monogamy was not the way relationships were done.
Yeah.
Some respects, engaging in ethical non-monogamy is actually a way of subverting, Western patriarchy and that idea that there's only one right way, which is enforced by religion. And different religions, not just Christianity, but Christianity seems to make a big deal out of it more than anyone else, I think, which is interesting because when it comes down to it, it's in line with that patriarchy. It's really all about control. When you think about it, in Christianity, depending on the flavor of Christianity you are, sex is still a very utilitarian thing, right? It's about procreation. It's about, it's a pleasure that's only supposed to be enjoyed in marriage. And if it's not pleasurable in marriage, well, too bad. Right. That's where you are. And, I like to joke that in a lot of Christian circles, marriage is this consecration between a man and a woman and God, which technically is a threesome. So unless,
right.
If you're squeamish about anything kink related, put that in your mind for a little
You're
bit.
Right. Chew on that a little bit.
Yeah. One quick thing I forgot to mention when we talk about flavors of non-monogamy, one of those flavors is relationship anarchy.
That is exactly what I was going to bring up.
Okay, there we go.
So tell us about it.
So relationship anarchy is there's no real one definition, but the general idea is none of our relationships are hierarchical, as in we prioritize one or the other. So whether it's our friends, our romantic partners, or family, we do our best to keep them on an even playing field. And as situations and needs arise, that's the event, the person that we choose to give our attention to. So as a relationship anarchist, even if I have one or 3 or 5 romantic partners, I don't put them in one over the other, or I don't prioritize them over my friends. But the through line of monogamy is this is your one person, this is the most important person in your life, and this is the person for whom you can neglect all your other relationships, for whom you give all your attention to. And it varies, but the expectation is there. The expectation is, if I'm monogamous and my partner makes a request or demand of me, let's go with a request to make it a little softer. Request of me, but in some cases they're demands. Makes a request of me, I automatically have to prioritize that request over the requests of any other relationships or friends or even myself. In many cases. Many people in monogamous relationships have found ways to negotiate this and make this work. And also in non-monogamous relationships, those are the negotiations that need to be made as well. But that's what relationship anarchy is all about. And I should also be clear to say, I'm not anti-monogamous. I don't want to get that point across. Right. I'm not anti-monogamy, but I am pro what works for you. And that often involves us asking deep questions around why am I really monogamous? Why do I believe monogamy is right and non-monogamy is wrong? Where did I pick up that narrative? Do I really believe that narrative? Do I have permission, and do I give myself permission to, if I want to, experiment with non-monogamy and see if it works for me or not? And be non-monogamous for a while and go like, you know what, this isn't working for me. I prefer monogamy. And you're monogamous, but you're very clear that you're doing it because it's what works best for you, that is reflective of who you are, and not because there's some cultural narrative or constraint that you need to follow.
Mm-hmm. So we've covered definitions a little bit, and and for people who are like, I've never heard of non-monogamy before, I'll put in the description some definitions so you can go back and reference those. But I'm curious how non-monogamy has worked in your life. What is your story of learning about non-monogamy and deciding that this is something that you wanted to pursue, that this is part of what makes you you?
So as my practice or my life choice of non-monogamy comes after the majority of my adult life being monogamous. I was married for 15 years, and my wife passed away about 7 years ago, and we have a daughter, and she's absolutely lovely. And I think I was introduced to the concept of non-monogamy through a friend, just like having a beer one day, and this is my friend said this is what they practice. This was their life. I was like, curious, tell me about that. So as they were talking to me about it and describing what it was, there was this element of like, that makes so much sense. Like that feels more like it should be, because many times for monogamy, it's sort of set up as a what you can't do versus what you can do. So there was a time in my life where anyone who's been in a very long-term relationship knows they have the ups and downs, it's lefts and rights. You have great moments, you have moments where your relationship goes through some real low points, some ebb points. If you believe in numbers, you've been married or in a long-term relationship for a while, that about every 7 years, that 7-year thing, because seven is a number of completion. It's a cycle. Cycle ends, a new cycle begins, and often relationships between 6 to 8 years, that's when there tends to be more of an evolution of the individual within a relationship, right? And this is part of the other interesting thing about long-term monogamous relationships is often we don't make room for the individual to evolve and change, right? When you marry the person, especially if you marry young in your early 20s, as I did, when you marry an individual who has not yet really figured out who they are or know themselves, there's gonna be some changes along the way. And all of a sudden, wait, this is not the person I married, but we're married and we have to stay together, or we get divorced, or we cheat, right? And there's other options, this being, non-monogamy being one of them. So I was going through one of those points in my life and in my marriage, but I didn't want to leave my wife. I didn't want to give up my family. I actually suggested this, and it was not something my wife was open to at all. But it was also not me feeling like I needed to upend my life at the time. So it didn't happen. And then after she passed away, I still found myself in monogamous relationships because it was all I knew. It was my norm. It was my comfort place. Plus, I'll admit it, I didn't feel brave enough to step into non-monogamy for a lot of reasons. My own personal insecurities, me being a pastor, and what would people think, all that sort of stuff. Like all that was weighing on me, and it didn't. So my next few relationships were monogamous. They were wonderful relationships. And at the same time, there was still always this feeling of not feeling complete romantically, sexually, relationship wise. And finally, within the past year, I decided this is the time. Not worried about what other people think. And part of it might be an age thing. I'm 48, approaching I like to say the second third of my life, because I plan to live to 120. So
there you go.
the into the second third of my life, and going, how am I truly wanting to live? A lot of this is COVID related, coming out of COVID as well. Many of us during that time of COVID really took a look at our lives, going like, we didn't realize how so fragile life is. And how do we really want to live? How do I want to show up in the world? How much of authentic me do I really want to be? And that was really my driving force, is actually why I left being a church minister, because, love churches, but people in churches be crazy as all get out. So, I was like, I can't anymore. I just can't. So I was like, you know what? Here I am at 47, 48, and I have never lived my life 100% authentic me. Why don't I give it a try? What do I have to lose? And amazingly enough, it's been a very, very fulfilling experience. And one of the things that it's really, interestingly enough, got me to do the deep dive on is my relationship with loneliness. Right? My consciously choosing to be solo polyamorous means that I still majority of my time is spent with me.
Yeah.
And with myself and by myself. And for many of us, that's an overwhelming thought, right? For many of us, we find ourselves in relationships, and we stay in relationships, and unhealthy and unhappy relationships, because the imagined alternative of loneliness is too overwhelming. So, this may be a bad marriage or bad relationship, but at least somebody's there and I'm not by myself. So a lot of this has been me learning how to be by myself, with myself, and which is different. And you're saying, but you have partners, right? I'm like, yeah, well, we all have people in our lives, right? Even if
sorry, I cut in a little bit.
No, go ahead.
But being lonely and being alone are different things.
Yes.
You can be with people and feel incredibly lonely. Just being around people, being with people, being married, being in relationship, is not a cure for loneliness.
Yes.
And so I respect that desire to kind of heal your relationship with yourself and work on that and recognize that that relationship is worth tending. And just because you are not in I
have a primary partner.
Yeah, just because you don't have a primary partner doesn't mean that you're
less fulfilled.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, and that's the other narrative that we have internalized. Part of the American dream, or as I like to call the American brainwashing, the American gaslighting, is that part of our goal is to get married, have the 2.5 kids in the house in the suburbs, or whatever the number is, right? And there's something that if I don't find a life partner, there's that narrative that I haven't checked all the boxes of what it means to be a successful adult. And it's even worse for women than it is for men, and heaven forbid you're a single woman of a certain age and you haven't had children, or even worse, you don't want children, right? That heart goes out to all the women who are in that situation and just keep getting the daggers from friends and family members.
Or you can't have children. You want children, but you can't have children. Yeah.
There's that too as well. But yeah, so it's, for me, it's always about fully knowing who you are and be willing to step into living that. And let's say you have been in a long-term relationship or a marriage, and you think, well, my partner will never go for this, and I want to explore this and I feel stuck. My encouragement to you is, have the conversation, begin to broach the conversation. Don't feel like cheating is your option. Broach the conversation with your partner, and you open that door, and there's the possibility and the likelihood that it may actually bring you closer together. Because one of the things that, and I think you mentioned this earlier, one of the things that makes ethical non-monogamy work is radical honesty.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of monogamous relationships in which that is not present, where people have wants, needs, desires that they keep from their partner because it doesn't fit the script of what a monogamous relationship entails. So, yeah.
And I think one way that you could, if you wanted to talk to your partner about maybe unfulfilled desires, or even tiptoe into talking about non-monogamy, I think one way you could start is recognizing the limits of yourself and the other person. Because I think we live in a society that a lot of partnered people or married people are actually more enmeshed, and then they don't realize where their identity stops and the other's starts. And just like, oh, we like to do this, and recognize that you are your own person. Your partner is your own person. You can't control that person or their desires, and their feelings don't automatically dictate your own feelings.
Yes.
And kind of just set up those identity limits in a healthy way. Not that the other person doesn't impact you, but yeah.
So to circle back to the Enneagram thing.
Yeah.
Shout out to all you Enneagram 9s out there like myself. This is our textbook trait, right? We merge. We lose ourselves in the other person because we have this internalized narrative that if I help them meet their needs before my own, then they will love me.
Yes.
And I want to be loved, and it becomes all about the other person's needs, and we lose ourselves in that. And I mean, this is a common human trait, but us nines, this debilitates us in so many ways. And a lot of it is this idea that all of our needs need to be met by one other person. Right. And we know that's not true, because we all have friends, we all have family members that meet these needs that we don't articulate, but most of our deepest needs that involve another person, romantic needs, sexual needs, all these we kind of have this, again, narrative that our spouse or life partner is supposed to fulfill these needs, or we supposed to feel these needs being met by that person. And then when we don't, that's when things like, oh, am I with the wrong person, or the dishonesty and the cheating happens. But that's not how but that's an impossible standard. No one can fulfill all the needs that you have. And that's why it's important to have discussions around, do you know what the needs are that you have? To what extent the person that you're with can meet those needs, and to what degree are you both willing to seek out those needs in other people as well. So the part of the beauty and what's ultimately, I think, fulfilling about being a person who practices consensual or ethical non-monogamy is that you will realize that multiple people in your life will fill in those gaps. So there's no feeling of there's no sense of, well, I'm not getting this need met, or this, there's the feeling of this relationship gives me this, fill in the blank, and this relationship over here gives me different things. And as a result, I am feeling fulfilled. I am feeling like my needs are being met in various ways, and I am not putting the pressure on any one person to meet those needs.
Sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, I think we do that without even trying, without being intentional about it.
Oh, yes, very unconscious.
And so it's nice to add a layer of intentionality about it, so that it doesn't all fall on if you have a primary partner, on your primary partner. Like, it might not be Esther Perel, but a different relationship book I read talked about how people who have kids, they often find themselves not wanting to be intimate in the bedroom with their partner. And it's because their need for touch, their need for skin-to-skin contact is being met by their child. Not in a sexual way, right. But that need is being fulfilled, and they just don't recognize it, that need is being filled otherwise. And they're like, why don't I want to, like, and they often are then overstimulated and like they don't want any more touch. And then they're like, but I still love my partner. Yeah. Why don't I want to be close to them? It's already being met. And I think about like romantic needs outside of a marital relationship. I'm not sorry, but I get a lot of my romantic needs met from my best friends. Like when we go out for dinner and we all get together and we all get dressed up and go out and have dinner, like that is a romantic, that's romantic as hell. Like it's lovely. And that doesn't detract from my relationship with Nick. You know, if anything, right. It's healthy, it's good. It helps me feel like myself, and so I'm fulfilled, and I'm not like just leaning on Nick for those things.
Right. And one of the things that brings up is a conversation around jealousy.
Yes.
Right? One of the other things is this misunderstanding that, I found my life partner, and suddenly I stop being attracted to anyone else.
To hear the full conversation, tune into the next episode of Called to Be Bad. Here's a preview of what's to come in part 2.
This is the thing I used to say to my wife: just because I love you, everyone else didn't suddenly become ugly. Like that's not that's not how, right? That's not how this works.
That's all for this episode of Called to Be Bad. Keep being your bad, beautiful selves, and I will see you next time.